protecting?
Yes. Who is he protecting?
We
and
know
serving?
who he's protecting.
I know.
The whole damn system.
Here to it. We're out here to shine the light on what's wrong with this political structure in existence today.
Sunshine, great disinfectant.
Justice for Eric Garner, we shall not be moved.
Justice for Eric Garner, we shall not be moved.
Just planted by the water, we shall not be moved.
People are trying to get up the steps.
I guess that will
Trying to get up them steps.
Let's go. Listen,
Come on, gotta get off the
I supposed to get up the stairs, now get off the stairs. I asked you nicely 4 times, didn't I? Get off the stairs.
We don't have to shut our mouth. We do not have to.
Yeah, why don't you say that again to the camera? Could you film that again?
Move back stairs. Let's go. Down.
Let's go.
Let's go.
You don't even know what that
This
is.
is a good illustration of what we're dealing with.
Yeah, word on that. They're pushing us down. They're all about crushing the system with the force they need
We asked you
requisite.
5 times nicely. You don't want to listen.
Not on the stairs. Please, asking you nicely. Please go down off the steps. Okay? Okay? Thank you, ma'am.
People are free. I didn't hear my brother.
I'm in the struggle and I can't leave. Calling out the violence of the racist police. And we ain't gonna stop till our people are free. Say what? We ain't gonna stop till our people are free.
I think it's important to get information to the general public to know what happened behind closed doors. The reality is that none of us knows what charges were presented to the grand jury. The possibility exists that only one charge of murder was presented to the grand jury, and that's why the grand jury decided to vote a no true bill. Perhaps other charges, other lesser included charges should have been presented to the grand jury. What was the interpretation of the law? What was the explanation to the grand jurors? Did they ask any questions? How many witnesses were presented? Who were the 50 witnesses? So those are some of the questions that we seek to ask, because this case is bigger than one death. It's larger than one borough. It's larger than one police officer. In fact, even one district attorney. It's really about justice, and it's really about reforming a system which is broken, and a system which dates back to the 12th century, which was abolished by the Great Britain a long time ago. And so all that we want is some reform, and all that we want is some transparency, and all that we want is some sunshine.
I want to thank those who came out today in support of what we are trying to do here today. I understand the sacrifice that you made, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for making it for this cause. I want to also thank the people who came out to distract them from what we are trying to do. For you and your ways only bring us together more. You only make us stronger. In order to stop what we are doing, you must expose yourself. And when you expose yourself, more people will join our movement. Before I get too far, I want to address, for the final time, the Twitter controversy. My words and actions were twisted and presented out of context. My father was murdered. Justice was miscarried. And I felt like I was watching the celebrities and others exploit my father's death. So whatever I allegedly did, said, or thought should be presented in those terms. I would not distract myself from what we came here to do anymore by getting involved in manufactured drama for other people to profit from it. We are here today in display of solidarity around justice. Justice for my father's murder. What does that mean? We know that it won't be another trial. So then what does justice look like? Well, let's learn from other people who felt like they were wronged in history, that felt like they had their humanity put on trial by the way of murder, mistreatment, and poor living conditions. They now proclaim the slogans to never forget. And guess what? They never forget. They tell their children their story and teach their children to teach their children's children the same story. They commit to having history presented in terms that favor the perspective and fight hard to ensure that this happens. We all know what the problem was. We talk about it in our beauty shops, our churches, and at our family functions. I say we never forget. This year, there will be 2 major elections that take place in Staten Island. The nation will be watching us. They aren't afraid of our rallies. They don't respect our marches, and we are not disciplined enough to boycott anything. We can control who our elected officials are, though. We can do this with very little effort. I challenge each of you to commit to getting registered and vote today or tomorrow. Go to your local post office, library, courthouse, and get it done. They cannot win an election on this island without us. All we gotta do is show up. They ran an election last year and never addressed my father once. They were afraid. The Democrats were afraid. They showed up in the hood, passed out pieces, and thought they had it in the bag. They should have been afraid not to speak on his death. Never forget. This time, we forced them to address our issues and dare them to try and use my father's name as a platform to run on. If you haven't made a statement before, you are not allowed to speak his name and expect to vote from our community. From now on, we pick our leaders and they pick our issues, period. Never forget. Thank you.
So, as the public advocate for the City of New York, and let me emphasize the entire City of New York, my office has a compelling and a particularized need to serve as a catalyst for reform, particularly in the grand jury system, and to satisfy the appearance of a fair and impartial process as it relates to the grand jury proceeding in this particular case, and to address the public perception that there are irreconcilable differences between that which was presented to the grand jury and the video that we all witnessed, and to inform individuals not only in the city but in this nation that their eyes do not lie. And so this really has nothing to do with the grand jurors themselves, but in fact the process within which a no true bill was voted. And it's important that the public understand that the vote of a no true bill is not subject to any review by any judicial body at all. It's also important to know that all that we want to protect the witnesses, we want to protect the grand jurors, we want to ensure that any identifying information is protected. All that we want to know is what were the charges that were presented to the grand jury. Was it one charge, the charge of murder? Was any lesser included charges presented to the grand jury? If they only had the charge of murder, clearly a no true bill would be understandable. How many witnesses were presented? There were 50 witnesses presented. Were they all police officers? Who were the experts that presented the evidence to the grand juries? Who interpreted the law? And last but not least, the question is really the medical examiner's evidence. Was there exculpatory evidence that was presented on behalf of the police officer? And the reality is that the public wants to know why in this particular case was this one officer, why was he treated differently than any other individuals who were prosecuted before a grand jury? Why did it take, it took several weeks for this grand jury to be presented? And as was indicated earlier by the Legal Aid Society, most defendants, as in a former public defender myself, most grand juries are usually held within days, not weeks, but days. Why, in this particular case, was this individual given special treatment? And that's why we need to know what happened behind closed doors, to provide some confidence in this system, to restore faith in the system, and to make sure that there was an impartial process in this particular case. This is above and beyond one death, above and beyond one borough, above and beyond one police officer. It's really about restoring faith in our system.
The law requires that we demonstrate a compelling interest to overcome the presumption of secrecy. We think there are several compelling interests that support disclosure in this case. There's a public conversation taking place now regarding grand jury secrecy, regarding the workings of the grand jury. There are calls for reform. There are calls for abolition. The Garner grand jury plays a central role in that conversation, and yet the people don't know, the legislators who are called upon to act don't know what took place in that grand jury room. They don't know why the grand jury reached the decision that they reached. And to have an informed electorate, to have an informed community, to have informed legislators, we need to know how and why the grand jury reached the decision that it reached. So we urge disclosure in the court today. We think that transparency is better than secrecy in a democracy, that light is better than darkness, and we think that the court should shed some light on what happened there.
Shine, let it